Hello and welcome to today's video. Today's video is number 5 in a 6-part series of composition tips, and this one is all about the mysterious land of black and white photography and how it helps you create more interesting compositions. So we're going to talk about what black and white is, how it works. We're going to talk about editing your photos, and even before we do that though, we'll talk about ways to visualize in black and white, and then we're going to actually edit some photos from color to black and white so you can see how the whole process works. Why create black and white? That's the first question. Why do we create photos in black and white in a world full of color? There's lots of reasons. One reason is because black and white tends to be timeless. We tend to make connections of color to specific periods of time. So if we remove that color, the image then is timeless. It's not stuck in a specific era of choices of colors. I'm looking at you, 70s, with your avocado green and what was that? The goldenrod yellow. Yeah. Another reason to create black and white photos is a way of seeing differently as you're creating the photos. When you take out the color, the distraction that color can be, like my red flannel shirt, when you take that out, what you're left with are tones, which are ranges of brightness, textures, shapes and lights, shapes and lines and patterns. And you're also left then with the basics. So without color, we're forced to more carefully examine the tonal ranges of the light that's available to us and how it interacts with our subject, and then also choose subjects that are interacting in interesting ways with that light. So as you're looking to create black and white photos, here's some things to look for. Number 1 and number 2 and number 3 are all connected to contrast. Contrast is the range of tones from brightest to darkness, or differences in shapes or other ways we have contrast. I'll start off with talking about range of tones. So you're looking for dark blacks and bright whites. I mean, it's called black and white, not dark gray and light gray. So we need those blacks and the whites, those whole and everything in between if possible. That'll give us the broadest range of ways we can show what's going on in the image. Second thing to look for is texture. When you strip out color, then one of the ways to hold interest is with interesting textures or contrasts of textures. When subjects have texture, then they can also have the potential to interact with the light and create shadows in interesting ways that they wouldn't normally. Again, you can also, as I mentioned, look for contrast in texture, smooth and rough, shiny and dull, organic and man-made. So look for those things as you're visualizing what to create photos of. And last, believe it or not, in creating black and white photos is pay attention to colors. If what you're creating an image of is already kind of monochrome, maybe a steel skyscraper against a blue sky, there's mostly just going to be blue and some grays in that. So that'll lend itself well to black and white conversion. Other ways to look at color is to find contrast in color. Lots of different colors. You'll have more range of tones to play with than when you're doing the edit, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Since the real world is in color, it can be hard to visualize what your photo is going to look like in black and white. It takes practice to do this, it's time. You just have to spend time behind the shutter, looking at images, getting them to your computer and seeing how the black and white conversion works. However, if you have a mirrorless camera like my trusty Fujifilm system, you have the advantage of being able to see black and white as you're creating the image. The reason for that is you're looking through an electronic viewfinder or a screen interpretation of what the camera is seeing. You're seeing what the sensor sees, and you can tell the sensor, hey, just show me black and white. So that has some great advantages as you're looking through here to see your photos. And then you have a better sense of what it's going to look like. Every camera works a little differently. How you set this up, my camera uses what's called film simulations. Your mileage may vary, but take a look at that. It's a great way to get a head start on seeing what black and white's going to look like. Speaking of what the photo is going to look like, if when you're creating images in your mirrorless camera and you've set up however it previews or shows you black and white in the camera, be aware of something. If you're creating images in RAW, so the digital negative format, which captures exactly what the sensor sees, when you get to your software, it's going to show you the photo in color. And that's actually okay. That's how it's supposed to work. Any of the film simulations or color profiles or whatever that you use to show differences in your viewfinder or back screen on a RAW format in a mirrorless camera will just be basically overlays, a little bit of data that says just take out the color and show it this way. But the actual photo, the RAW file itself, will still be color. If you're creating images in JPEG format, they will be black and white or whatever film simulation color profile, however your camera specifies, that will then be baked into the photo. So obviously, in creating black and white photos, a big part of this is processing, is getting them in the computer, using software, and then creating the black and white image. And there's lots more to it than just clicking the black and white button. Like I mentioned with black and white, one of the best ways to get started in looking for images that will render well as black and white is contrast. So most of the adjustments we're gonna make in software will deal with increasing contrast so that we get a wide tonal range and the best possible image that we can out of the black and white. So I'm gonna hop over to Lightroom. We're gonna take a look at that on some sample images and show you how this works. All right, so welcome over into Lightroom Classic. I'm going to show you a total of 4 images. 3 of them were taken yesterday on a photo walk in downtown Bellevue, Washington. And the other one is just to show you this doesn't, black and white isn't just for pictures of things, but it also works well on pictures of people. I have a wedding photo to show you as well. So first, with this image, remember how I said one candidate for images that might render well as black and white is if it's basically one color anyway. This building is a steel and glass building with some grayish blue skies. It was really cloudy yesterday when I was creating photos. So this doesn't have much contrast of light, but it has kind of a monochrome color palette. So what we're going to do is address those things and create, I think, a pretty interesting black and white image. So we're going to start with the crop tool to get rid of this white spot gap here that's kind of bugging me. Crop tool is a little tricky, you know, when you're dealing with where to crop. So I have a whole video on that. Parts of a video. So I'm going to straighten it out a little bit too. I want to get to a little more vertical here so the vertical lines look vertical. And then I'm looking for awkward gaps like I've got one up here and down here. So I'm going to crop a little more and then just kind of rearrange this, see how we're doing. Need to come in a little more in the top right. Left, that's left, Michael. What's that look like? I'm checking mostly the corners. And we'll just come in a little more there. Okay, so we're relatively straight. I'm going to hit the enter key. We've committed that crop. Let's get this to fit. There we go, bigger view. I'm not going to use, for right now, the temperature and tint because we're going to click the black and white and take the color out. So that's a start. It needs a lot of work. So I'm going to start, and this is where I usually start with editing black and white. I start with the contrast slider and just crank it up. I'll usually go somewhere between 50 and 60, maybe even 70. Your preferences, taste, and style will vary, so do this however looks good to you. I'm going to start there. I've got lots of highlights, so I'm going to pull those down a little bit, just a little bit, and the whites as well, over especially on the left-hand side of the image. And I'm also going to decrease the blacks. I want, again, to get good contrast. Generally, I don't look at the histogram except for when there's exposure problems. But a sign of an interesting black and white photo oftentimes is the histogram that's kind of a U shape, where you've got more values at the black and whites, the left and the right, than you do in the middle. So as you can see, what I've done here is I've adjusted contrast by literally adjusting the contrast slider and then adjusting the highlight, shadows, whites, and blacks. The presence section, which is, if you're in Lightroom CC, this is in the effects panel, texture, clarity, and dehaze. Those work to increase sharpness, and the way they do that in varying ways is by, in varying ways, working with different areas of contrast. So the texture is the most subtle, and when I'm doing man-made things, human-made things, I'll turn that up as well quite a bit, somewhere around 40 or 50. Clarity, I'll turn up just a little bit depending on the subject. If you have any noise in your image, clarity and dehaze are going to bring them out even more, so just be aware of that. And then the dehaze, you can see, I kind of like this. It's really crushing the blacks. You can see what I'm doing with the blacks. Those areas are pure black where it's showing blue now. So I kind of like that. It's a little much. Usually with these sliders, when I'm turning them to very high values, what I'll do is go, oh my gosh, that kind of looks good, and then back up just a little bit because they tend to be cumulative and add on top of each other. All right, so the next step in adding contrast is down in what's called the black and white mix panel, which is underneath the tone curve. I'm not going to use a tone curve here just because I don't generally use tone curve a lot on black and whites. I mean, there's a zillion ways to do all these things, and I don't use tone curve. Okay, so the black and white mix, the original colors in the image, you can adjust their brightness. So if I go to the right, it's going to get brighter. If I go left, that color in the original image will get darker. So if you remember the original image, it looked like this. The only color here is blue. So if I move those other sliders, they're not going to change the color, any apparent colored brightness, excuse me, tone difference in the image. So the red's not doing anything. There's no red. So let's just jump down to the blue. And you can see we can adjust where the reflections are happening. We can adjust the brightness of that. You're also going to probably get a little bit in the aqua. That's going to be some of the slightly lighter blues. So again, this is by eye. What looks good, what kind of gets you to where you want to go. And I feel pretty good about that. I like how this has now become basically just a bunch of lines and shapes, and it almost looks abstract. It looks like a puzzle. It looks like almost a 3D puzzle, and I really like how that looks. All right, so moving on to the next image, another architecture image. Again, very muted colors, same gray sky day. It's kind of that squinty gray sky. So there's lots of brights, but not a lot of contrast. So again, the first thing I'm going to do, we'll start at black and white. And then I'm going to turn up the contrast. This one I'm not going to crop. I like the crop on this. I'm going to pull down the blacks as my next contrast move. One of the things that I like about gray days like this is the sky just can go to pure white. No detail, and kind of looks like something you don't normally see. So I'm just turning up the highlights and whites. I'll pull down the shadows a little bit, add some mystery down here in the bottom of the frame. And then we'll turn up some texture, just because I like that look. A little bit of clarity, and just a teeny bit of dehaze. If I turn the dehaze up, you're going to start seeing the clouds, which I don't want to see. I don't want to see the details there. So we'll just turn that up just a little bit. Again, that's going to bring out the texture. This was at ISO 400, so it's bringing out just a little bit of the noise you're probably seeing in here, which is also texture on the granite. So your personal preferences will vary about how much tolerance you have for noise or any kind of noise in your image. All right, the black and white mix. We've got red, which is going to do a little bit, not a lot. We've got some more happening in the oranges. Again, not a lot. A little bit, I think, in yellows. No, actually not very much. And then we'll have some in the blues as well. But again, this image was so gray to start, so muted in color, that the black and white mix on this one isn't going to have much impact. Different photos, again, with more experience, you'll learn which ones are going to have the most impact or need some help from the color mixer, or the black and white mix in this case. All right, so that one's done. Let's move to the next photo. So this next photo is this bird on a construction site fence looking into the construction area behind it. So let's get started with the black and white. We'll go over here, click on black and white, and I kind of like that. There's not a lot of color in here to begin with, and we're gonna then move down to contrast, turn that up. I want to create a different composition, I'm realizing now, and I didn't have a more of a zoom lens that I could get to quickly, so this is at the maximum reach of the lens I had. I want to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to do that with the crop tool and change the composition to kind of follow a rule of thirds alignment. And then I'm also going to use the spot removal tool to get rid of the light that's in the background there. I'm going to use the gradient filter to darken up the fence covering that's down below so that the bird will then be the brightest thing in the image and the first thing you see. So here we go. So crop, I'm going to use this steel beam over here on the right as my left side of the fence. That's actually on the left, sorry. My left side of my image. And I'm going to crop up and then reposition the bird. So I'm kind of going for, again, like I said, rule of thirds. I want to get his head in that intersection point kind of close there. There we go. His or hers, I don't know. That's a better crop. All right, so next we're going to use the spot removal tool. I'm going to get rid of this bright white light up here. We're going to camouflage it behind some other stuff. We're just going to grab an area that is blank. Give me a second. All right, so I've used the spot removal tool to get rid of the light. I'm going to camouflage that a little bit more by just darkening everything up there, by decreasing the blacks. I'm not going to do anything with the highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. I'm going to come down to texture, turn that up. And then we go with that. I'll turn up clarity a little bit and dehaze just a tiny bit. Last move here is I'm going to add the graduated filter and darken up this area at the bottom. I'm going to reset that so I can now darken it. So just some negative exposure. Again, it's an eyeball thing. Move this up. If you're not sure how to use the graduated filter, I do have a video on that. I will link to it up here. So that darkens that. So now the bird is part of the brightest part of the photo and easier to see. So here's an interesting thing with black and whites. Oftentimes when I'm done doing the edits in black and white, what I'll do is then go back and see how the color image works and looks. A lot of times, because especially I'm cranking contrasts so much, they look awful. This one isn't too bad. In fact, I almost kind of like it better, except for I need to reposition the spot removal of the that white light a little bit. It's cut off and pretty obvious right now. But I kind of like this, the accentuation of there's the yellow on the beak of the bird, the yellow and rust in the steel pole, the steel foundation part, and that yellow in the back. So you kind of have this triangle of yellow that's above the fence line, which I kind of like. But this is about black and white, so we're going to go back to black and white. All right, last but not least, some people pictures and the black and white timelessness of that. So let's take a look at the next photo. So after I've clicked on black and white, you'll see this image has some edits. Those are the edits I made on the color image. And I'm going to leave them there for now. One thing I will suggest when you're editing photos with people in them and skin and faces, when you get to the presence section or the effects section in Lightroom CC, texture, clarity, and dehaze, I generally leave clarity and dehaze alone. It's not very nice on skin, especially clarity. And I usually don't turn the contrast up as much as well, because that's going to add shadows, which makes people look older, which most people don't want. So what I will do though is come down to the black and white mix and play with the original tones, and some interesting things will happen when you add skin tones to the equation. And this is true of pretty much all tones of skin. They have some orange and reds in them, and some yellows often, and then usually no blues or hopefully no greens as well. So in this image as well, we've got a lot of green behind them, as you saw. So what I'm going to do is start actually with the green slider, and I'm going to pull that down. I'm going to darken the background. That's going to make their faces relatively brighter, and that's a good thing. Next, I will go to the orange, which is going to be the predominant skin tone in most skin tones, I believe, especially Caucasians. And one thing you can do to be a nice, general pleasing look for most skin tones is to increase that orange. It's going to hide the wrinkles, hide the shadows, how much, up to your taste and the specific image you're working on. Similar with yellows, there's a lot of yellows in the greens of the foliage here and less so in the skin, so I'm going to leave that alone, and if anything, make it a little darker. Reds will often be the pink parts of faces, so lips, sometimes ears on Caucasian folks. So do you want brighter lips or darker lips? I might go just a tiny bit darker here. But that's about it for this image as far as the black and white mix part. So there you have it, a conversation about black and white photography and how you can use it as a tool for learning more and growing in your composition skills. Hope you found this helpful. If you have questions, comments, or tips, suggestions, things I missed, please leave them in the comments below. I'd be glad to read those, and I do reply to each. I look forward to seeing you in those future videos. So until then, have fun creating images, stay safe, stay well, and bye for now.